Good morning. How you going? I thought I'd better check. Yeah, well, that was a nice introduction. That just about tells the story. I might as well go home now, I think. But yeah, look, it's been an interesting thing, and those of you that were here yesterday and heard Bill Lark talking about how his idea of making whisky in Australia was a good one, as it turned out. But I remember at the time, years and years ago, when Bill and myself were business partners. We owned a little hotel together with a couple of other partners as well. And I can remember the day we were having a few beers, I'm pretty sure, and he was telling me about his trip up into the Highlands going fishing with his father-in-law. And they came up with the idea of why not produce whisky in Tasmania. And I thought, you bloody idiot, what are you doing? Why would you make whisky here? You know, the Scots are doing a perfectly good job, and if you're not happy with the Scots, well, the Irish are doing a pretty good job as well. So we didn't really take him seriously, but from time to time I'd go down around to his place, and lo and behold, there's a little still sitting on the kitchen sink. And so we put a little brew together, knocked out a bit of spirit. He had a little barrel there, and we put some of the spirit in this barrel. And we thought, well, we better leave it mature and just see how it comes out. So we thought, okay. So we had a couple of beers, and about half an hour later we thought, well, let's go and have a look and see what it tastes like. And so we took the bung out, poured a little bit out, and oh, that's much better. You know, this is pretty good. So I got involved through Bill and Lynn. Lynn is Bill's wife, who is really one of the powerhouses behind the Lark Distillery. Got one of the best noses and tongues for whisky that I've ever seen. But the idea for me then grew from there. Now, back in those days, apart from running our little pub, which was up in the ski fields in Tasmania, up at Ben Lomond, I also worked in, looking down a microscope, I worked in a pathology lab in those days. So I sat there day after day looking at slides, which is sort of a nice thing to do, you know, out there saving lives and all that sort of stuff. But I thought, you know, selling beer and making whisky and killing a few people is probably a better way to go. It's much more fun. Well, hopefully it's not killing them, but you never know. But when we looked at it, you know, Tassie's got this this thing about it, you know, this clean green image that it has. You know, we've got an abundance of really good quality water there. The barley that's grown there is fantastic. Cascade Brewery and Bogues Brewery have done very well out of the barleys that have grown there over the years. And this picture behind me sort of illustrates that idea. You know, we've got a good base for producing a product like whisky. The problem is it just hadn't been done for so many years. I mean, the last whisky I remember was Corio, which is, I think that disappeared back in the 60s or 70s, I can't remember. I remember Dad had a bottle, and I remember he gave me a taste one day, and I thought, why would you drink that? But I thought that about beer and wine too, and in those days when I was a kid, but I got better. But for me, I got involved. In those days, I'd work up at the ski field running the pub through the winter, and then I'd go back to looking down the microscope at the pathology lab in the summer. After a little while, Bill and Lynn got their distillery going a little bit better and moved to Richmond, their first commercial place, other than the kitchen at home. And so he asked me along if I wanted to come and work for him in the summer instead. And I thought, yeah, that sounds a much better idea than looking down a microscope all day. So I started working at the Lark Distillery out at Richmond. And it was a nice place to work, and I learned a bit about distilling then. In the meantime, the Tasmania Distillery was set up, and that was set up by a guy, a local entrepreneur, who didn't like whisky, didn't drink whisky, but thought, he had a building. He had the old gasworks building, which is just near the centre of Hobart. It was a pile of ruins at the time. and he converted some of those buildings into a bottle shop and a restaurant and a bar and all this sort of thing. And he had one other little building, well, a building that he built in another little part of the area. And the law had just changed, so you could now run a small distillery. So he thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll set up a distillery. The Scots will panic and buy him out to shut him down. He'll make a fortune. Well, he made some whisky. He had his son, who was going to uni at the time, and a few of his uni mates running the stills, and they made some barrels of whisky. But I'd have to say it wasn't very good. And the Scots didn't panic, and they didn't buy him out, so he was stuck with it, which was an interesting thing. But that's where I came along quite a bit later, and also Bill Lark came along. But we'll just go back a step or two before we go there. Tasmania is also in a really good location. You see on this this picture here that Scotland is surrounded by the icy cold waters of the North Sea and close to the North Pole and all this sort of thing. Well, Tasmania is in a similar situation way down south. We're surrounded by the cold waters of the Southern Ocean. We get all the pure rains and snows and things that come up from the Antarctica. So, in a very good position. This is a picture of some of the farmlands in the north coast of Tasmania, and we have barley that's grown all down through the northwest coast, down through the central part of the Midlands of Tasmania, and also down south where we are at Cambridge, up through the Cove Valley. So a lot of good barley there. And one of the good things that the original guy did was he went to Cascade Brewery, and worked it out with them for Cascade to make his wash for them. And wash is the product that is distilled to make whisky. So it's beer, basically. Barley, water, yeast, very simple. And Cascade, up until this year, were the only commercial brewery left in Australia that malted their own barley. One of their maltster, Roger Ribbett, he used to go around the state looking at the farms, all the barley producers around the place, and see who was growing the best crops and the crops that he needed for what they required for their beers. He was in charge of malting the barley, and they had a very good system going there until, unfortunately, the bean counters that bought Cascade or CUB a few years ago shut down the malting system this year, which is a shame. I thought that was a good thing. But we now go to Moobrew as well. That's a boutique brewery that's been around a few years now. They make some very good boutique beers, and so we get some wash from them as well. The pictures you're looking at now, this is where it began. The building down the bottom there is where the original guy set up the business, and it was set up for tourism more than for distilling. And as a distiller, it was a pain in the arse actually making whisky in that place. It was very difficult. You couldn't get trucks in and out. Everything had to be pumped in and out of the building. There was no room for anything. There was nowhere to bottle. It was just set up for tourists. But Sullivans Cove itself, for those of you that know Hobart at all, Sullivans Cove is the dock area of Hobart. So it's where Salamanca Place is. It's where all the ships come in, the fishing fleet goes, and the Sydney Hobart's yachts come in. So that's the picture there. So the distillery itself is just to the right there, just out of the picture. Or that's where it was back in those days. And inside, the little area that we had for the still was down in a pit, and we had to climb up and down a ladder every time we wanted to do something with the still. But it was all nice and bright and shiny and copper, and it was lovely. But the original owner was a bit of a showman, and he put things in it that didn't really do anything. We had flashing lights, so all these red and gold flashing lights going on, and when I first walked in there I thought, I wonder what they do. And he also had the big thing, that big vessel in the middle of the picture there. It's a reflux minaret. And if you were making vodka, you'd use that, but we were making whisky, so it wasn't being used. The line arm just went straight through it, and didn't actually do anything. And back in those days when the tourists came through, I spent most of my time explaining what this thing does and then explaining that we didn't actually use it. It was just there for effect. So one of the first things I did when we actually got hold of all this was get rid of that reflux minaret because I got so sick of talking about it. But the original owner produced 162 casks of whisky in that time, and some of it turned out to be pretty good, but most of it didn't. Also, the packaging he used, as you can see in the pictures down the bottom there, were closer to what I would put in the blended category, not a single malt category. So it was something that Rob didn't really understand. To him, a perfectly good whisky was Johnnie Walker Red. We were making single malt, a totally different product. It ended up being sold to another couple of developers, and that's when myself came along as a distiller, because the new owners heard that I knew something about distilling through Bill Lark. Bill Lark was put on as the manager at the time. He was there for about 18 months. And there was myself, Andy Hocken, Ray Browning and Clinton Brown were the 4 distillers, and we worked round the clock 24/7 for about 18 months. And we produced 629 barrels of whisky during that time. And that's the whisky that's being bottled today and is winning the awards today. But once again, the two guys that took it on, the two guys that bought the distillery from the original guy, also didn't understand whisky. They bought it as a trophy business. They liked the idea of saying that they owned a distillery. They thought Johnnie Walker Red was their pinnacle whisky. That's what they thought they were producing. And we could never get them to understand the difference between what we were producing as a single malt and a blend. Nothing wrong with blends. I drink blends, they're good, but they're a different product. They struggled, as the first guy did. Tourism wasn't really the thing. The building we're in was very difficult to get for tourists. They were also vying for the wrong market. We had busloads of people turning up. We'd give them the tour, and then they'd buy a teaspoon or a tea towel, and not much whisky. So the business didn't survive. But for some strange reason, I decided, well, maybe we should buy it, buy the liquidated plant and stock. So managed to get together a couple of people with big pockets. And if you're going to get into the whisky industry, you need big pockets. At least somebody does. That wasn't me, but we found these guys, got them interested. They were happy to do it, and we've worked together as a partnership for the last, where are we now, 12 years or so. And basically they've let me run with it, which was very good of them. Initially they didn't have much to do with it, apart from putting money in for the first few years. Every time I sort of spoke to them, it was, can I have some more money please? Which is probably why they didn't contact me a lot in those days. But they did back it for the first few years until we got on our feet and started selling again. So we went from a workforce of 9 down to 2, myself and one other guy. And that other guy was one of the guys that worked out the front in the shop. So I was the only one with any distilling experience, and I thought, well, what are we going to do here? You know, this is interesting. We bailed out of the place at Sullivans Cove, and we found this little concrete warehouse down at Cambridge, which is just near the airport. Not a very glamorous building at all, but it was ideally set up for us at that stage to set up the still and start operating. So we didn't do tourism at all. We basically shut the door on tourism altogether because it wasn't working for the previous place. Australia in those days wasn't really interested in whisky, particularly not whisky made in Tasmania or Australia. But we thought, well, where do we go from here? What do we actually do? And my theory was that we need to go for quality. We cannot compete on volume. Our markets are a long way away. In those days, I thought our markets are going to be Asia, possibly Europe, maybe America. But wherever the markets are, Tasmania is a long way from it. So if we were going to compete at all, we had to try and produce quality. Then we had to try and get some credibility for the brand. And at that stage, the brand had no credibility. It was rated very, very poorly. That was because we couldn't convince the previous owners to not bottle the original owner's stuff. It was poison. If you've got a bottle, it might be a great collector's item, but leave the cap on it. Then the next thing we had to do, once we got the spirit, was, well, how are we going to package it? Because the packaging in those days wasn't much good either. So not a very good story up to now, really. But then a couple of years later, we started bottling some of the bottles of the whisky that we produced from 1999 through to 2001. Now, in the old days, for the previous company, we were just told to go and get a barrel and bottle it. And we'd be saying, shouldn't we go and select a barrel? Shouldn't we taste them and see that they're okay before we bottle it? No, just go and get it. So that's what we did, hence the poor quality ratings. When we took over, we thought we're not going to bottle anything until we've tasted it and were happy that it was worth bottling. And to our delight and surprise, there were some barrels only 7 years old that I thought were really good. I was really impressed. I was very happy with them. I thought, well, let's bottle some of these. So that's what we started to do. And back in those days, we were only bottling 1 or 2 barrels a year. It wasn't much at all. And somehow, and I still don't know how, I don't know who, somebody sent a bottle to Jim Murray, who writes the Whisky Bible in the UK. And I was too scared to, basically. I thought, I can't send anything to him because, the ratings are that low with him as it is. I don't want to make it any worse. But somebody sent him a bottle. Somebody, I hope, liked what they bought for that particular barrel and sent it to Jim, and we scored 95 out of 100 points, which in the whisky world and the Whisky Bible, that's liquid gold. So we're all of a sudden in the top 1% of Jim Murray's ratings. Now, I didn't know anything about this. That particular barrel, I think it was barrel number 274, an American oak barrel, 200 litres, a 7-year-old, all of a sudden became very popular. We were just selling a few bottles a week, not much was happening. And all of a sudden, just order after order for this particular bottling was coming through. And we were just being slammed. People were ordering cartons of it and all this sort of thing. We thought, what is going on? So the next guy that rang, I asked him, why do you want this particular bottling? And they said, oh, you've just got 95 points in the Whisky Bible. I thought, oh, have I? I didn't know that. So I ran out, went to a local bookshop and found a bottle of found one of the Whisky Bibles and bought it and went back to the distillery and had a look, and sure enough, there we were, 95 points. And I thought, you little beauty, this is fantastic. And that's sort of when it started picking up for us. After that, I sort of summoned the courage to send Jim a few more samples in the following years, and then we did quite well with Jim. Jim seemed to like us, and he actually came to visit us a couple of times, and so that was good. And then I summoned the courage to enter a few more competitions, and which we always did well at. We always came up trumps. So I became more and more confident that what we had produced in that time, that second generation of whisky from 1999 on, we'd actually done a good job, which was a very satisfying thought. But as you can see, we've got quite a list of awards that go back a fair way. But it was the awards that gave us the credibility, and that was the catalyst for us starting to export. But you can see here in this picture, this is one of the original owner's bottles. And in my view, it wasn't working for us at all. And that was an impediment to getting into markets, whether it be here or overseas. And I was constantly being told, you've got to do something with your packaging. This was version 2, which we had a little go at. We thought, oh, we know what bottles of whisky look like. We'll come up with something ourselves. We came up with this, which, to our disappointment, the would-be distributors said the same thing. We love your product, but go away until you can put it in a decent bottle. So, oh God, what do we do here? So we bit the bullet. We looked around at some wine labels, and we picked out a bunch of wine labels that really impressed us. And we found out who designed them. We went to those designers, and we found out then it was going to cost us a lot of money to get really good packaging designed. And we were a bit bit surprised at the cost. And for us then, we were very tiny. We weren't selling much at all. We weren't making any profits. The big boys were still putting money in, and I had to go to them and say, look, we need a lot of money to get this packaging done. But they said, yeah, okay. So after a little while, we came up with this packaging, and this is what turned us around. This is what got us in front of distributors here in Australia and overseas. And for us, being producing a product that Australia is not known for producing and trying to take it out to the market is a very difficult thing to do. Now, if you're producing a Scotch whisky, I've always said that you could put that in a brown paper bag, write on it with a texter, and you'll sell it, because everybody knows and loves Scotch whisky. It's an easy sell for them in a lot of ways. For us, it's not like that. The first thing we have to do is have a package that people are willing to look at, the customers are willing to look at. So with the bottles you see there, I thought we'd found that, and it turned out to be true. You know, we went back to some of the distributors that had rejected us in the past, and they said, now you're talking. Okay, we'll have a look at you now. So that was an important thing for us to do as well. But in the part of that process, our logo, which is distilled with conviction, is a play on our convict heritage in Tasmania. But it was something that in the series of drafts that the designer came up with, he had distilled with conviction written somewhere and the broad arrow somewhere else. And I said to him, I really like that. But he was just having a go at us being Tasmanians and all the rest of it. I said, but I like it. Can you put that together somehow? And that's what he came up with. And we've actually trademark registered that. So, but it just so happens that I've got ancestors on both sides of the family that were convicts. So I like to think that we're handpicked by Britain's best judges of the day, and pretty good people, really. But if you leave here today and you can't find your wallet, just give me a call. I'll give you your money back. I can't help it. It's in the blood. But what happened from winning these awards, we now had some credibility, which was a great thing. We now had the packaging. What do we do from here? How do we... I thought our market was probably going to be Asia. So I managed to talk the state government into giving me some money to go to Asia. And so I travelled around, put our whisky in front of some distributors and some retailers in various countries around Asia. And the message I got back from them was consistent. Look, we love the spirit, we think that's really good, but who's buying it in Europe? And at that stage, nobody at all. And I thought, oh God, what are we going to do here? The other message that they consistently sent me was, come back when you're 12 years old. So I thought, oh God, I've got a few years to go yet. Well, you know, this is going to be hard. So obviously Asia wasn't our market. The Asians to me are a little bit like Australians. We look to Europe or America or somewhere like that to get verification about the products that we're producing before we accept it ourselves. And I was ready for that. I expected that. I didn't really expect that from Asia. I thought they'd be more into it than that, because the Asians do drink a lot of whisky. But nevertheless, the message was clear. So I thought, how am I going to get into Europe? That's going to be a hard one. So Bill and myself got together again, and we talked ourselves into going to Whisky Live in Paris. Partly because we thought it'd be really nice to get into Europe with our whiskies, and partly because going to Paris sounded like a really good idea at the time. Never been there before, so I thought, let's go and have a go. Let's go and have a look. So we paid the money to go to Whisky Live in Paris, put our suits on, off we went, and they'd set us up a little stand in the corner of one of the rooms. And Whisky Live in Paris is a big event. It goes on for 3 or 4 days. Thousands of people go through. All the big boys are there, all the big brands. And there was us with our little table with our little Australian flag. And nobody would come to us. All these people would be walking past, and there'd be like this big arc around our table. Nobody wanted to know, what's this Australian flag? What's this going on here? So we thought, what are we going to do? So we'd go out one by one and just sort of talk to people, or try to, because neither of us spoke French. Try to find some people that understood some sort of English, and eventually we'd get a couple to the table. We'd take them through our little spiel, and once we had a few people there, people had come around and have a look, and over a period of a couple of hours we managed to get quite a few people to have a taste. Later on that day, We were starting to feel a bit dejected, but we were gradually getting more people coming. People would come through later on in the day and say, look, we went past you earlier on this morning, but we've been told to come and have a taste. So here we are. Turned out they liked our whiskies, which was a great relief. And from there, we managed to sign up a distribution or an import deal with La Maison de Whisky, who are sort of the big hitters of whisky distribution in France. So there was step number one. We'd done it. We thought, this is great. Then Holland got involved. We won a couple more fairly decent accolades from Jim Murray. So Van Wees in Holland got interested in us as well. So I took myself off to Holland. Hadn't been to Holland either. I thought, no, let's go to Holland. This sounds pretty good. So we had a weekend at Amersfoort in Holland, which is a delightful little town where Van Wees operate from. They have their pot still festival there, which is a really good event. The Dutch we found to be different. Here I am, little Australian guy with my little flag, and by that stage I'd got quite clever and I bought a little stuffed kangaroo along with me, put on the counter. And people love that idea, so they'd come up and say, oh, Australian whiskey. The advantage of the Dutch is they speak English really well. So they were all over us. They were very upfront, came to see us, came to talk about it. They loved the idea of an Australian whiskey. So we found the market in Holland, quite, well, not easy, but it was, they accepted us straight away, which was really nice. The French were a little bit more reserved. It took a couple more years to really get going there, but it did happen for us in the end. I decided you can't have a talk like this without a graph. Everybody loves graphs, don't they? But this shows you sort of the rise and fall and the rise again of our sales over the years. So we're basically going there from 2005 through to last year. And we've come from a pretty low base. We started getting overseas sales. We still weren't selling anything in Australia really at all. For a couple of years up to 2007, 2008, GFC comes along and everything went quiet. All the big buyers from France and Holland, and that stage were in Belgium, they just decided they weren't buying anything and they were going to ride the GFC out. So things started to slide again. We thought, what are we going to do? So we worked a bit harder on the Australian market and started getting into the Australian market a bit more. But then a guy that just up the road at the Cove Valley Vineyard, Todd and Jill, came to see me one day and said, look, Todd is Canadian originally, lives in Australia now, nice little vineyard down the road. Said, look, we're looking at setting up our own distribution business in Canada, and we'd like to take more than just our wine. We want to take a few other things, and would you like to sell some whiskey in Canada? I said, sure, yeah, never been to Canada. I'd love to go there. So that happened, and we sent a little pallet off with them, and to our surprise, it started selling, which was really good. The other good thing about Canada is you go through the government system there, you get paid. So it's not like selling it to other distributors around the world, which can be a risk. The Canadian governments, various provincial governments, take ownership of that whiskey. It goes into their bond stores and doesn't come out until it's paid for by the retailer. The distributor never actually sees it, and the government pays us. Brilliant idea. So that worked well. From there, that distributor also started up a business in the US, and that's what got us into the US. So sales started going up. And Europe started buying again after a couple of years, so that was okay. We got there. But the US, as we just heard in this last couple of talks this morning, it's an interesting place to get into, and if you get into it, it can be really good. Part of the deal was with our Canadian importers and then our US importers was for us to go over there and support them in getting the brand out there. And so I quite willingly did that. So I've been over to Canada a couple of times now and over to the US a couple of times, and I've been from one side of those countries to the other and had a ball, actually, a lot of fun. They're very switched on. They work hard. I found myself in LA with one of our distributors, and I thought, you little beauty, Warner Brothers, you know, all the movie studios. I get to meet some film stars. You know, this is going to be great. They had me booked up from 6 o'clock in the morning till midnight, you know, every day. I didn't get to see a thing except the inside of his car and the inside of places like this where we were doing shows all the time. So they're dedicated, and when they get you over there, they want you to work, and which is great because it put us in front of a lot of people. And one of the things I found, the Americans and the Canadians are a lot like the Dutch, very interested. They'd be walking past and look at the Australian sign and the Australian flag and the kangaroo, and by that stage I had a koala as well. Things were going well, I could afford one of them. And they say, well, what have we got here? Australian whiskey, never heard of that. What's it like? Give me a taste. And they were right into it. They were very interested. They were a very engaging market. And so I found that a refreshing thing. But once you're in there, they want to know about your product. They want to know where we come from, you know, what is Tasmania like. All these things, they just want to know. So one of the best things to do is actually talk to them about it and just bring pictures along, show them. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff they want to know. You know, where does the barley come from? You know, it's fascinating the difference in different markets. But through that, through the growth in that, and last year winning the world's best single malt award in the UK, we were just slammed. And so for the last 18 months, we just haven't stopped. We've now gone from, I think there were 5 of us then, we've now got 10. And some of those now are more into marketing and sales. We've gone from not having a cellar door at all. In fact, at the previous place, the little concrete warehouse, we didn't even tell people where we were. After we started winning awards, people wanted to know, so they'd be ringing me up and saying, where are you? We'd say, oh, in Cambridge. And they'd say, yeah, I know, we're in Cambridge, but we can't find you. So I'd have to go down, walk down round to the corner and wave them down, show them how to get into the warehouse. And they'd say, you know, bloody oath, you're hard to find. And I said, well, yeah, you know, we're not really doing cellar door. But now that you're here, come in, and we show them around, we give them a taste, we tell them the story. And they seem to like it. They'd nearly always buy a bottle. And then it got to the point over the last couple of years where we were getting crowded out. You know, the warehouse was filling up. We had no room to move. We had 5 of us working in a little box of an office. It was a nightmare. People would be turning up all day long. You know, I don't want to sound to be whinging, but it was a pain in the arse. You know, all these people turn up, we couldn't get any work done. So, but it was good. I mean, we'd gone from a point where the previous business really wasn't getting any visitors, or none of the right ones, to people that were seeking us out. The award comes along, we get slammed. We found that we needed a bigger place. So the guy that owned the building that you can see there, which is 2 or 3 doors along from our old warehouse, knocked on the door one day and said, look, I'm selling up. Do you want to buy a warehouse? So we thought, yep, okay. So we bought this one, which is 3 times bigger. It's got a display centre out at the front of it, which we've turned into our tasting and sales room. We've got all our barrels in the one spot for the first time. All this time, up until last year, our barrels were in another warehouse, the other side of Hobart. We were running trucks back and forwards. Barrel regime was difficult, you know, just to try and pick which barrels we wanted to bottle and all that sort of stuff. It was very difficult. Now, for the first time ever, it's all under one roof. It's fantastic. We can do tours. We show people around, show them the barrels, show them how how we distill it, the process we go through for bottling. And the process that we go through, and one of the reasons I think we've been successful, is that we still don't bottle any old barrel. We select each barrel that's going to be bottled. So we'll get regular samples, or get samples regularly from the various barrels. We will sit around and we'll taste them on a Friday night and work out which ones we think are ready for bottling right now. So it's not an age-driven thing, like it's not a matter of it turns 12, let's bottle it. It could be 7, it could be 14. If I think it's ready for bottling today, then I'll bottle it. That's the way it works. So we take quite a bit of time selecting those barrels. And if we don't think the barrel is right and we think it's got a future, it'll just sit back on those racks until it's ready. And it'll just have to take its time. Some barrels, I've thought there's flavours in there I just don't think will be any good. I can't see this changing, I can't see it improving. So we'll sell that off to cake manufacturers or sauce manufacturers or something like that. And that's what I did with pretty much all the original owners' whiskey. As much as it hurt to sell single malt for practically nothing, it was the best thing that I think we did. I just didn't want to put an inferior product out. We just couldn't do that to ourselves at that stage, or at any stage. But what we do, once we've chosen the barrel to bottle, we'll decant it, we'll dilute it, and we can take up to a month to dilute it. Just bring it down a bit at a time till we get it to the right percentage, and then we'll leave it to settle. And that can take anything from a month to 4 months to settle. So all the flocking occurs, falls out of suspension, then we'll bottle it. So we don't chill filter, we don't plate filter, we don't add caramels. It's just a natural whiskey. And if you put our bottles of whiskey in a cold place, it'll probably flock again. So you get all these little particles form in the whiskey. You get a sediment on the bottom. Nothing wrong with that. That's all part of the colour, the flavour, the esters of the whiskey. It's an important part of it. If you strip that out, you've got a very thin, uninteresting whiskey. So I think that's part of the reason that we're appealing to the judges around the world, is because we're offering them an old-fashioned style of whiskey that you don't see a lot of these days, not in the commercial world. So I guess that's, time's up. Last slide. Beat you to it. So that's, I guess, my story. And now I can say that my two big partners haven't had to put any money in for a number of years now. We're at last operating in the black, and we're distilling 24/7 again after some years of not distilling at all, and other years we might have produced 40 or 50 barrels. We're now producing something like 90,000 litres of new make spirit a year. That's our program for this year and years to come. So it's taken us 20 years, almost, but we've finally got there. Oh, thanks for listening.